a hidden chamber concealed behind a church altar for centuries. Ancient biblical manuscripts that could reshape religious understanding. One humble woman's last $200 spent on a foreclosed church when she had nowhere else to turn. This is the extraordinary true story of how Naomi Reed's desperate purchase of an abandoned sanctuary revealed sacred texts that would transform not just her own broken life, but an entire community's connection to its faith and history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The insistent beeping of Naomi Reed's alarm clock punctured the pre-dawn darkness at 5:15 a.m., though sleep had already abandoned her hours earlier. At 42, the former librarian's face showed the unmistakable strain of someone carrying too many burdens for too long. The small efficiency apartment in Millbrook had become a prison of anxiety as she stared at her dwindling bank account for the third time that morning. 3 weeks, she whispered to herself, calculating the days until eviction. 21 days before we need to find somewhere else. Naomi pulled her threadbare robe tighter and shuffled to the kitchenette, careful not to wake her 15-year-old daughter Lily, who slept on the pull-out sofa in what served as their living room, dining room, and now bedroom. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Naomi spread her job rejection emails across the counter, 14 in the past month alone. Between the printed rejections sat a foreclosure notice that had consumed her thoughts since yesterday. St. Matthew's Chapel, a small stone church on the outskirts of Millbrook, was being auctioned by First Regional Bank for a minimum bid of just $200. The structure needed significant work, but the price was unbelievably low, reflecting years of abandonment and the bank's eagerness to remove the liability from their books. "Mom, you're up early again." Lily appeared in the narrow doorway, her perceptive eyes taking in the scattered papers. At 15, she'd become painfully aware of their precarious situation, shouldering worries no teenager should have to carry. "Just getting organized for today," Naomi replied, discreetly sliding the foreclosure notice beneath a stack of bills. No need to share her desperate consideration of spending their last $200 on an abandoned church that could either be their salvation or their final financial mistake. As she prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal for them both, Naomi's phone chimed with a text from her younger sister Beth. "Any luck with West Side Apartments? Dad said you can both stay with them if needed." Naomi sighed deeply. Moving in with her father would mean returning to the small town she'd left 20 years ago, abandoning the life she'd worked so hard to build and admitting complete defeat. She couldn't bear the thought, not yet, not without trying everything possible. After seeing Lily off to school, Naomi opened her laptop to update her resume for what felt like the 100th time. Her career as a research librarian had once been promising, specializing in historical document preservation at Millbrook University's renowned library. The position had provided stability and purpose after her divorce 6 years ago. Then the university's budget cuts had eliminated her department 18 months ago, and despite her qualifications, finding comparable work had proven impossible. Naomi clicked through to her bank account, $243, 17 remaining. She'd been careful, stretching every dollar, but without income, eviction loomed inevitably. Her eyes drifted back to the foreclosure listing. St. Matthew's Chapel had once been a charming stone church built in 1886, sitting on a half-acre just outside town. The minimum bid was set at $200, reflecting its dilapidated condition and the bank's desire to offload a property that had sat vacant for nearly a decade. In better times, Naomi would have appreciated its historical significance. In her current circumstances, it represented either madness or her last chance at independence. Naomi had never considered herself impulsive. Before her world unraveled, she'd been methodical and cautious, planning every aspect of her life with careful precision. But circumstances had stripped away those securities one by one, leaving her with dwindling options and mounting desperation. At noon, Naomi drove to her third job interview that week, taking a detour past St. Matthew's Chapel. The small stone building sat nestled among overgrown trees, its stained glass windows boarded up after repeated vandalism. Despite years of neglect, the church retained a certain dignity, solid stone walls still perfectly aligned, a beautiful arched doorway, and the distinctive bell tower that gave the chapel its unique character. Naomi pulled over, studying the property more carefully. According to local history, St. Matthew's had served the rural community for generations, until declining membership forced its closure in the early 2000s. The last pastor had died without successors, and the diocese had eventually surrendered the property to the bank after years of tax liens. As Naomi contemplated the building, her phone rang, the hiring manager from her morning interview. "Miss Reed, I appreciate you coming in today, but we've decided to move forward with a candidate whose recent experience better aligns with our current needs." The rejection was politely worded but devastating nonetheless, the third such call this week. Naomi ended the call and stared at the church, a wild idea taking shape. The auction was tomorrow. Her savings would cover the minimum bid with perhaps $43 left for immediate essentials. It was reckless, almost certainly foolish. The reasonable voice in her head listed all the reasons this was a terrible idea: the unknown repair costs, the zoning complications, the absurdity of thinking she could transform an abandoned church into a home with just $43 remaining. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yet something about the chapel called to her. Perhaps its resilience despite years of abandonment, or maybe just the desperate hope of walls and a roof that couldn't be taken away with 30 days' notice. Naomi arrived at her afternoon interview distracted, her thoughts repeatedly returning to St. Matthew's. The interviewer asked about her 5-year plan, and Naomi provided practiced answers while mentally calculating whether a church bell tower could be converted into a bedroom for Lily that evening. After Lily had gone to sleep, Naomi researched everything she could find about the property. St. Matthew's Chapel had once been the spiritual center of the surrounding community, hosting weddings, funerals, and baptisms for generations of local families. According to one local history blog, the church had been known for its beautiful altar, hand-carved by a master woodworker in 1887, and rumored to contain hidden compartments for protecting sacred items during more turbulent times. Naomi scrolled through the bank's disclosure documents: water damage in the vestibule, electrical systems requiring complete replacement, a partial roof collapse over what had once been the pastor's office. Each item should have deterred her, yet the extraordinarily low asking price kept drawing her back. "This is insane," she whispered, closing her laptop around midnight. Yet as she drifted to sleep on the uncomfortable recliner that had become her bed, Naomi found herself picturing Lily having her own room again, and perhaps, if they were very lucky, turning a dilapidated chapel into a home with walls that couldn't be taken away with a simple eviction notice. The next morning, after Lily left for school, Naomi drove to the county courthouse where the auction would take place. She had no experience with property auctions, had done none of the proper inspections, and was operating purely on instinct, something the old Naomi would never have done. 5 people gathered in the small auction room: 2 contractors looking for renovation opportunities, a representative from a real estate investment company interested in land value, a curious local history enthusiast, and Naomi, clutching her debit card with sweaty palms and a racing heart. When the bidding opened at $200, Naomi raised her number immediately. To her surprise and relief, the contractor showed no interest. The property clearly needed too much work for a profitable flip. The real estate representative countered once but quickly lost interest when informed about the zoning restrictions. That would prevent commercial development. After a tense silence that felt eternal, the auctioneer's gavel fell. Sold to bidder number 3 for $200. In a daze, Naomi completed the paperwork, transferred the payment that represented almost all of her remaining financial security, and received a set of keys to a property she had never even entered. By afternoon, she was legally the owner of St. Matthew's Chapel, either her family's salvation or her final financial disaster. What Naomi Reed couldn't possibly know as she drove to pick up Lily from school, uncertain how to explain her impulsive purchase, was that behind the boarded windows and locked doors of St. Matthew's Chapel lay a hidden chamber, untouched for over a century. Concealed behind the hand-carved altar, this secret room contained biblical manuscripts that scholars had believed lost forever, texts that would connect this small-town property to religious history and a mystery that powerful institutions still preferred to keep hidden. The mysterious scene Lily had noticed seemed to beckon her. Setting aside her paperwork, Naomi approached the chancel, lantern held high. The carved wooden screen behind the altar stood nearly 8 feet tall, depicting scenes from the Gospel with remarkable craftsmanship. The central panel, showing Matthew writing his Gospel, contained the rectangular discontinuity they'd noticed earlier. Naomi ran her fingers along the seam, feeling for any mechanism that might reveal its purpose. Near the bottom, her fingers detected a small, almost imperceptible depression. When she applied gentle pressure, something clicked inside the wood. Heart racing, Naomi pushed against the panel. It resisted briefly before pivoting inward with surprising smoothness, revealing a dark space beyond. Naomi stood frozen, lantern illuminating what appeared to be a hidden chamber behind the altar. Unlike the rest of the church, this space showed no signs of neglect or decay. A small room, perhaps 6 feet square, contained a simple wooden table. Upon it sat a metal container similar to a safe deposit box, alongside several leather-bound volumes. The discovery sent a chill down Naomi's spine. She had purchased a foreclosed church expecting nothing but difficult renovations and financial strain. Instead, she had stumbled upon what appeared to be a deliberately concealed chamber, preserved and protected despite the building's general deterioration. With trembling hands, Naomi entered the hidden room. The air felt different here, dry, and somehow preserved, as if the chamber had been sealed against time itself. The leather-bound volumes on the table were unlike modern books, their bindings crafted in an ancient style that her librarian's training immediately recognized as consistent with medieval manuscript preservation techniques. The metal container, approximately the size of a small suitcase, bore an inscription in Latin, Custodite Secretum, keep the secret. Naomi carefully opened one of the leather volumes, its pages crackling slightly with age. Inside, written in a careful hand, was text in what appeared to be ancient Greek, alongside detailed illustrations reminiscent of early biblical manuscripts. Her academic background in historical document preservation sent warning bells ringing through her mind. These appeared to be religious manuscripts of significant age and potentially enormous historical value. If authentic, they didn't belong in an abandoned church in Millbrook. They belonged in a climate-controlled university archive or museum. Yet here they were, carefully hidden and preserved in a secret chamber that had apparently remained undisturbed despite the church's abandonment. Someone, presumably generations of the Thomas family, had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect these documents. As Naomi carefully returned the manuscript to its place, unwilling to risk damage through improper handling, she noticed something else, a small leather-bound journal tucked beside the metal container. Unlike the ancient manuscripts, this appeared to be from the early 20th century. Opening it carefully, she found English text in a neat, educated hand, April 15, 1923. The Responsibility for protecting the Matthean texts remains with our family, as it has for generations. Recent inquiries from Rome have grown more insistent, but Father's instructions were clear. These texts must remain hidden until the world is ready for their revelations, which may challenge accepted doctrine. I pray for guidance in fulfilling this sacred trust. The entry was signed Thomas J. Thomas, Pastor, St. Matthew's Chapel. Naomi Reed sat back on her heels, the implications of her discovery settling over her like a physical weight. She had purchased a foreclosed church for $200, hoping merely to provide shelter for her daughter. Instead, she appeared to have stumbled upon hidden religious manuscripts of potentially enormous historical and theological significance. Manuscripts that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal from the world, including what appeared to be the Vatican itself. What secrets did these ancient texts contain? Why had they been hidden rather than preserved in official religious archives? And perhaps most importantly, who else might know or care about their existence? As these questions raced through Naomi's mind, she failed to notice the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the churchyard outside. Someone else was taking an interest in St. Matthew's Chapel in the middle of the night. Naomi carefully closed the hidden panel behind the altar, the pastor's journal photographed but left in its place, weighing heavily on her mind. The beam of light she'd noticed sweeping across the churchyard had disappeared by the time she reached the front door, but its mysterious presence left her uneasy. Sleep proved elusive that night. Naomi lay on her air mattress in what would eventually become her bedroom, mind racing through possibilities. Her background in historical document preservation had taught her to recognize potentially significant artifacts, and the manuscripts hidden behind the altar undoubtedly qualified. But was she legally entitled to them? Were they part of the property purchase, or would they be considered separate historical artifacts? And why had they been sealed away for over a century? Morning brought practical concerns that temporarily pushed aside these questions. Lily needed breakfast, contractors were arriving to assess the roof, and Naomi had scheduled a job interview at the local museum, her fifth since moving to Millbrook and potentially her most promising opportunity yet. Remember, stay with Mrs. Thornton while I'm at my interview, Naomi reminded Lily as they ate cereal at their makeshift table. And Lily, no mentioning the hidden room to anyone. Not yet. Lily looked up intrigued. Why not? It's super cool and has old books and stuff. It has historical documents, Naomi corrected. And until I figure out exactly what they are and who they might belong to, we're keeping it private. Our secret for now, okay? Although disappointed, Lily nodded solemnly. Her natural enthusiasm for their Gothic adventure was tempered by the seriousness in her mother's tone. After dropping Lily with Margaret Thornton, who had graciously offered childcare whenever needed, Naomi drove to the County Historical Society, located in a modest brick building on Millbrook's main street. The society maintained archives of local historical documents and photographs, a logical first step in researching St. Matthew's Chapel and the Thomas family. The society's archivist, a bespectacled woman in her 50s named Judith Collins, greeted Naomi with polite curiosity when she introduced herself as St. Matthew's new owner. The chapel property. What a responsibility you've taken on, she remarked, leading Naomi to a research table. That building represents one of the finest examples of rural Gothic revival architecture in the county. The Historical Society attempted to purchase it several times over the years, but our funding never matched even the minimal asking price. I'm actually hoping to learn more about the church's history, Naomi explained, particularly the Thomas family who served as pastors. Judith's eyebrows rose with interest. Ah, the Thomas lineage. They were quite a scholarly family, particularly in biblical studies. We have some materials on them, though less than you might expect for a family with such deep local roots. The archivist disappeared briefly into a storage room, returning with a bound volume of newspaper clippings and several folders. These contain what documentation we have. The Thomas family was rather private about certain aspects of their work, particularly their scholarly pursuits. Naomi spent the next 2 hours poring over the materials, piecing together fragments of history. The Thomas family had indeed maintained the church for generations, with the pastoral role passing from father to son for nearly a century. Several newspaper clippings mentioned their scholarly reputation, describing them as experts in early biblical texts and occasionally consulting on matters of religious historical significance. One particular article from 1948 caught Naomi's attention. It described a visit from Vatican representatives to discuss matters of historical religious significance with Pastor Thomas J. Thomas. The article was frustratingly vague but suggested some theological discussion that had been conducted privately. "Do you have anything about Michael Thomas?" Naomi asked. "He would have been the last pastor to own the church." Judith nodded thoughtfully. Michael was quite the recluse in his later years. There was speculation about family papers or artifacts he might have possessed, historical items passed down through generations. He refused several requests from religious scholars and historical societies to examine any materials before his death. "And after his death?" Naomi pressed. "The church went directly to the bank. There was no family left to inherit, and no historical inventory was ever conducted to my knowledge. If significant historical documents existed, they were either removed before foreclosure or remained somewhere in the church." Naomi carefully maintained a neutral expression, not ready to reveal her discovery. Hypothetically speaking, if someone found historical religious documents in a private building they'd purchased, what would the legal status of those items be? Judith removed her glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "Interesting question. Generally speaking, physical items conveyed with a property sale belong to the new owner, furniture, fixtures, and yes, documents." She continued after a moment's consideration. "However, items of significant religious or historical importance exist in something of a gray area, especially if they might be considered cultural heritage. Their historical and monetary value could be substantial, depending on age, provenance, and content." Naomi thanked Judith for her assistance, promising to contact the Historical Society if she discovered anything of interest during renovations. She left with photocopies of key articles and a growing sense that her altar room discovery might be even more significant than she'd initially realized. Her interview at the local museum went surprisingly well. Millbrook Heritage Museum specialized in regional history and religious artifacts, a perfect match for Naomi's experience in document preservation. By the time she picked up Lily from the Thornton house, she had received a provisional job offer, contingent on grant funding being approved the following month. "You seem happier," Margaret observed as Lily gathered her belongings. "Good news," Naomi confirmed. "A potential job offer and some interesting historical information about the church." Margaret's eyes sparkled with interest. "Find anything behind that altar yet?" Naomi hesitated. While she wasn't ready to reveal her discovery publicly, Margaret's knowledge of local history and the Thomas family might prove valuable. "Actually, yes. Some documents that appear to be religious manuscripts. I'm still trying to understand their significance." Margaret wasn't as surprised as Naomi expected. Michael Thomas was quite secretive about family papers. "My grandmother once mentioned the Thomas family had been entrusted with protecting important religious texts for generations, though she never explained what that meant." As Naomi drove home, Lily chattering excitedly about her day with Margaret, her mind worked through the implications of everything she'd learned. The hidden manuscripts clearly connected to some scholarly religious matter, possibly controversial enough that they had been deliberately preserved in a private, sealed room rather than donated to religious archives or libraries. Naomi's thoughts were interrupted by the sight of an unfamiliar car parked near their driveway, a black sedan with plates she didn't recognize. As she pulled in, a man in a dark suit emerged from the vehicle, smiling professionally as he approached. "Ms. Reed? I'm Father David Moretti from the Vatican Historical Archives. We received an interesting inquiry suggesting that historically significant religious manuscripts might have been discovered on this property. I was hoping we might discuss this matter." Naomi felt a chill of apprehension. She had shared her discovery with exactly two people, her daughter and Margaret Thornton. Someone else knew about the hidden room and its contents, or someone was watching the church more closely than she'd realized. "I'm just beginning renovations, Father Moretti," Naomi replied carefully. "I haven't had time to properly inventory the building's contents yet." Moretti's smile remained fixed, but his eyes sharpened. "Of course. However, if you should discover materials relating to early biblical texts, I should inform you that such items may fall under Vatican jurisdiction, regardless of where they were found. Ancient religious manuscripts are considered important cultural heritage of the Church." "I understand," Naomi assured him. "If I find anything relevant, I'll certainly consider proper notification." "Excellent," he replied, handing her a business card with the Vatican seal. "I'll be staying locally for a few days. Just call if you need any assistance evaluating historical religious materials." As Moretti drove away, Naomi examined his card with growing unease. How had the Vatican learned about her discovery so quickly? And why would they send someone in person rather than making a preliminary phone call? That evening, after Lily was asleep, Naomi returned to the hidden chamber behind the altar, this time with better lighting and her digital camera. She carefully photographed each document without removing them from their protective environment. The manuscripts included what appeared to be ancient Greek texts of biblical nature, with marginalia and annotations that her limited knowledge couldn't decipher. The most intriguing item was the Thomas family journal, which contained entries spanning from 1923 to 1978, documenting their role as protectors of what they called the Matthean texts. One journal entry particularly stood out. August 12, 1948. "The Vatican representatives were most insistent today, claiming these texts rightfully belong in Rome. I maintained our family position that these manuscripts contain perspectives on Christ's teachings that conflict with established doctrine and would be suppressed rather than studied objectively if surrendered." The visitors departed dissatisfied, but without knowledge of the text's location within our church. "Our sacred duty remains unchanged. Protection until the world is ready for the complete truth." Naomi recognized the historical significance of these materials. They evidently documented some version of biblical texts that differed from canonized scripture, precisely the kind of historical religious documents that scholars would find invaluable, but that might create theological complications for established religious institutions. As Naomi was replacing the journal, she noticed something she'd overlooked previously, a small envelope tucked behind the metal container. Inside she found a key unlike any she'd seen in the church, along with a folded paper containing a single written line, "When danger threatens, the third pillar reveals the path." The cryptic message made no immediate sense, but Naomi carefully photographed it along with the unusual key before returning everything to its original position. As she secured the hidden chamber once more, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something far more complicated than mere historical curiosities. Back in her makeshift bedroom, Naomi researched Father David Moretti online, finding confirmation that he did indeed work for the Vatican Historical Archives. However, his specific department, the Division of Apocryphal Texts, typically focused on managing controversial religious documents that challenged orthodox interpretations. Naomi's phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Be careful who you trust with the Matthean texts. Not all interested parties have preservation in mind." She stared at the message, a chill running down her spine. No identification, no context, just a warning that confirmed her growing suspicion that the hidden room's contents carried implications beyond historical interest. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of hidden chambers and shadowy figures searching through her church. Naomi woke several times, listening for any unusual sounds, increasingly aware that St. Matthew's Chapel might have come with complications far beyond leaking roofs and outdated wiring. Morning brought an unexpected knock at her door. Margaret. Thornton stood on the steps, expression grave. "Naomi, I need to speak with you about those manuscripts. There's something you should know about my family's connection to the Thomas lineage, and why those texts might be more dangerous than valuable." Naomi Reed ushered Margaret Thornton inside, glancing nervously up and down the street before closing the door. Lily was still asleep upstairs in the choir room they'd converted into a temporary bedroom, giving them privacy for what promised to be a concerning conversation. "Coffee?" Naomi offered, leading Margaret to the small kitchenette they'd set up in the former pastor's office. "Thank you, but this can't wait," Margaret replied, her usual warm demeanor replaced by an urgency that heightened Naomi's anxiety. "Yesterday, a man visited our house asking questions about St. Matthew's Chapel, and specifically about religious manuscripts. He claimed to be from the Vatican archives." "Father Moretti," Naomi confirmed. "He came here afterward." Margaret's expression tightened. "I didn't tell him anything, but Robert recognized the name. David Moretti isn't just an archivist. He works for a specialized division within the Vatican that handles controversial religious texts that might challenge established church doctrine. His reputation among religious scholars is concerning." "What do you mean?" Naomi asked, tension building in her chest. "The Thornton and Thomas families have been connected for generations," Margaret explained. "My grandmother was a Thomas cousin. There's always been an understanding that certain historical materials in that church were sensitive, religiously significant beyond their historical value." Naomi hesitated, then decided to trust Margaret with the full truth. "I found Greek manuscripts and a journal documenting the Thomas family's protection of what they called the Matthean texts. The journal mentions disagreements with Vatican representatives in the 1940s. Margaret nodded grimly. "The alternative gospel, yes, that fits with family stories. The manuscripts allegedly contain teachings attributed to Matthew that were excluded from the canonical Bible, teachings that would have been considered too radical or potentially contradictory to what became official church doctrine." "But these manuscripts are ancient," Naomi pointed out. "Why would anyone care now? Biblical scholars study non-canonical texts all the time." "It's not about age specifically," Margaret said. "It's about content and authenticity. According to family history, these particular manuscripts have extraordinary provenance, features that suggest they may be among the earliest Christian texts ever recorded, possibly predating the canonical Gospels. Their existence challenges the established timeline of biblical compilation and potentially contradicts key theological positions that developed in later centuries." The implication settled heavily on Naomi. Her impulsive real estate purchase had entangled her with historical documents that apparently held significant religious implications. So this Father Moretti might represent interests more concerned with controlling these texts than preserving their historical significance? Naomi asked. "Precisely," Margaret finished. "And he likely won't be the only one interested once word spreads." "But how did he find out so quickly?" Naomi wondered aloud. Margaret's expression turned apologetic. "I may have inadvertently contributed to that. I mentioned your discovery to my brother James, who teaches religious history at Millbrook University. He must have discussed it with colleagues, and word spread through academic circles. I never imagined it would reach someone like Moretti so quickly." As if on cue, Naomi's phone chimed with an incoming call from the County Historical Society. Judith Collins's excited voice greeted her. Ms. Reed, I've just had the most remarkable call from Professor Elliott at Princeton University. He's a leading expert on early Christian texts and is tremendously excited about rumors of manuscripts found at St. Matthew's Chapel. He's offering to authenticate the materials at no cost and provide expert context for their historical significance. Naomi caught Margaret's warning glance. That's very kind, Ms. Collins, but I'm still assessing what I've found. I'll need time before inviting academic evaluation. After ending the call, Naomi sank into a kitchen chair. This is spiraling beyond my control already. You need to be careful who you trust, Margaret cautioned. These manuscripts have been protected by the Thomas family for generations for good reason. Religious history never truly becomes irrelevant when it challenges fundamental doctrine. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of car doors closing outside. Through the window, Naomi spotted a familiar black sedan parked at the curb. Father Moretti had returned, this time accompanied by another man in clerical attire. Ms. Reed, Moretti called through the door. I need to speak with you urgently regarding proper protocols for handling historically significant religious artifacts. Naomi opened the door a few inches, security chain engaged. Father Moretti, as I explained yesterday, I'm still inventorying the building. When I have something to report, I'll contact your office. The second man stepped forward, presenting credentials. Bishop Anthony Salvatore, Diocese Historical Preservation Office. Ms. Reed, we have reason to believe you've discovered materials that may have significant theological implications. We are requesting your cooperation in securing these items while their provenance and content are determined. Theological implications from ancient manuscripts? Naomi questioned skeptically. Historical context can impact current religious interpretations, Bishop Salvatore replied smoothly. We're merely following protocol for handling sensitive religious materials, regardless of age. Margaret moved beside Naomi at the door. I believe you gentlemen need official documentation to demand access to private property or privately owned historical items. Until then, I suggest you direct further inquiries through Ms. Reed's legal representation. She's right, Naomi added with more confidence than she felt. I have no obligation to grant you access without proper legal documentation. Bishop Salvatore's professional demeanor barely slipped, but Naomi caught the flash of annoyance in his eyes. We can pursue more formal approaches if necessary, but that process becomes considerably more adversarial. We are offering a cooperative path that would acknowledge your ownership while ensuring proper handling of religiously significant materials. I'll consider your offer and consult my attorney, Naomi responded firmly. Good day, gentlemen. After closing the door, Naomi turned to Margaret, heart pounding. I don't have an attorney. I can't afford one. Robert's nephew practices cultural heritage law in the city, Margaret replied. I'll call him immediately. In the meantime, you need to secure those manuscripts somewhere safer than the altar room. If they're willing to intimidate me like this, they might not wait for legal procedures, Naomi realized. As Margaret made her call, Naomi heard Lily stirring upstairs. The morning's revelations had transformed her already challenging situation into something far more complicated. She had purchased St. Matthew's Chapel, hoping to provide stability for her family. Instead, she'd inadvertently acquired historical documents that were attracting unwanted attention from powerful religious institutions. Over breakfast, Naomi maintained a facade of normalcy for Lily's benefit, though her daughter's perceptive gaze suggested she sensed the underlying tension. After Margaret departed with promises of legal assistance by afternoon, Naomi faced her immediate practical reality. She was starting a new job soon. Renovations were barely underway, and now she needed to safeguard controversial religious manuscripts. While navigating theological and legal complications she barely understood. Mom, can I explore more of the church today? Lily asked, innocent to the morning's developments. Not alone, Naomi replied, distracted by her racing thoughts. And the altar area is absolutely off limits now, no exceptions. Because of those men outside? Lily inquired quietly. Naomi looked up sharply. You saw them? Lily nodded. From my window. They looked like the priests in movies who hunt for sacred relics and cause problems. Out of the mouths of babes, Naomi thought grimly. They're just interested in old things we might find in the church. But it's important we keep certain discoveries private for now, okay? After settling Lily with safe restoration tasks, cleaning years of dust from the choir room bookshelves, Naomi retrieved her laptop and researched Father David Moretti more thoroughly. Margaret's warning proved accurate. Before joining the Vatican archives, Moretti had worked for a Catholic research institute with a reputation for acquiring controversial, religious artifacts that subsequently disappeared from public access. Naomi's phone chimed with another text. From the unknown number, check the third pillar on the north wall. The Thomas family never kept all their treasures in one hiding place. The message sent another chill down Naomi's spine. Who was sending these cryptic texts? Friend or foe? The sender clearly knew about the manuscripts, but hadn't identified themselves or their motives. By early afternoon, Margaret returned with her promised legal help. Andrew Lawson, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s whose specialty was cultural heritage rights and artifact ownership, listened intently as Naomi explained the situation. Fascinating case, Andrew commented after hearing the full story. From a legal perspective, the manuscripts are almost certainly your property as they were conveyed with the building sale. The bank made no exceptions for historical items in the property transfer. But the Vatican representative suggested otherwise, Naomi pointed out. They're overreaching, Andrew assured her. Religious institutions often attempt to claim ownership of artifacts based on theological significance rather than legal standing. While they might have a moral argument about religious heritage, their legal position is tenuous at best. So what should I do? Naomi asked. Document everything, Andrew advised. Photograph the items without disturbing them. Get them professionally appraised by a neutral third party, not anyone connected to the religious institutions that have approached you, and most importantly, secure them properly. They're historical, and monetary value is likely substantial. What about these veiled warnings about theological implications? Andrew's expression grew more serious. That's outside my legal expertise, but I understand the concern. Historical evidence that challenges established religious narratives, creates complex theological questions. Different religious authorities would interpret such evidence very differently. Naomi processed this information, weighing her options. I didn't ask for this responsibility. I just wanted a home for my daughter. History rarely asks permission. Before involving us, Andrew replied sympathetically. But these manuscripts have remained secured for generations for a reason. The Thomas family protected them. Now that protection falls to you. After Andrew left, promising to draft legal notices that would forestall religious institution intrusion without court orders, Naomi found herself drawn back to the third pillar mentioned in the anonymous text. Lily was outside under Margaret's watchful eye, giving her a brief window to investigate. The north wall of the sanctuary featured 6 stone pillars supporting the roof. Naomi approached the third one, examining it carefully. Unlike the others, this pillar had a small decorative cross carved at approximately eye level. When she pressed it experimentally, she felt a slight give, followed by a soft click. A small compartment opened in the pillar, revealing a leather pouch. Inside, Naomi found a thumb drive, a surprisingly modern item given the ancient nature of the other artifacts, and a handwritten note dated just 3 years earlier. To whoever finds this, I am Michael Thomas, last of my family to serve as guardian of the Matthean texts. If you're reading this, I have passed, and the church has changed hands. The manuscripts behind the altar are the originals, but their content has been digitized here as insurance against loss or confiscation. The truth deserves to survive, even if the physical artifacts do not. May you choose wisely how to protect this legacy. Naomi stared at the thumb drive, realizing that Michael Thomas, knowing his health was failing, had created this digital backup as a final safeguard for the texts his family had protected for generations. It was both a responsibility and an opportunity. Even if the physical manuscripts were taken, their content would survive. Back in the pastor's office, Naomi plugged the thumb drive into her laptop. It contained high-resolution scans of every manuscript page, along with translations into modern English and detailed notes on their historical context. According to Michael Thomas's files, the documents contained teachings attributed to Matthew that emphasized aspects of Christ's message that differed significantly from later church doctrine, particularly regarding the role of women in spiritual leadership, the nature of salvation, and perspectives on wealth and power that would have been considered dangerously radical in the early church's formative years. If authentic, these texts didn't just represent historical curiosities, they potentially challenged fundamental aspects of how Christianity had developed after the first century. No wonder both the Thomas family and powerful religious institutions took their existence so seriously. Naomi was studying the translations when she heard another car pulling into the churchyard. Through the window, she spotted a sleek SUV with university markings. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s emerged, approaching the church with purposeful strides. When Naomi answered the door, the man offered a business card. Professor William Elliott, Princeton University Department of Religious Studies. May I come in? We need to discuss those manuscripts and a proposal that might benefit everyone involved. Naomi studied the man carefully, immediately recognizing another player entering the increasingly complicated game surrounding her discovery. What kind of proposal? Elliot smiled professionally. The kind that would cover complete restoration of this beautiful historic church, educational opportunities for your daughter, and appropriate recognition for your role in bringing these important texts to scholarly attention. All we ask is permission to properly study and publish the manuscripts through academic channels. The offer was precisely calibrated to address Naomi's most pressing concerns: financial security for her family and restoration of the church that had become both her greatest challenge and potential salvation. Yet the timing and specificity of the proposal suggested Elliot knew far more about Naomi's situation than any stranger should. How did you know about my discovery? Naomi asked directly. I've shared that information with very few people. Let's just say the academic community is quite attuned to potentially significant finds. Elliot replied smoothly, especially those that might impact our understanding of early Christianity. Now, may I come in to discuss details? Naomi stood at her threshold, facing a decision that seemed to grow more complex by the hour. What had begun as a desperate gamble on a foreclosed property had evolved into a high-stakes situation involving religious institutions, academic interests, and historical secrets that had remained hidden for over a century. Whatever she decided next would affect not just the manuscripts' fate but her family's future and possibly even broader religious narratives. As Naomi weighed her response, she noticed Father Moretti's black sedan returning slowly down the street, its occupants watching her interaction with Professor Elliot with evident interest. Different factions were clearly converging on St. Matthew's Chapel, each with their own agenda regarding the religious secrets hidden behind the altar. The simple life Naomi had hoped to rebuild for her daughter seemed increasingly out of reach. Instead, she found herself at the center of a complex web of religious significance, academic implications, and competing interests, all because she had taken a desperate chance on a forgotten church with a hidden chamber behind its altar. Professor Elliot, Naomi finally said, I appreciate your interest, but this situation has developed rather suddenly. I'll need time to consider all options carefully. Elliot's professional smile never wavered. Of course, historical discoveries of this magnitude deserve thoughtful consideration. Here's my card with my direct number. I'm staying at the Millbrook. In through the weekend and can arrange a proper discussion whenever you're ready. As Elliot returned to his SUV, Naomi noticed Father Moretti speaking intently into a phone in his parked sedan. The converging interest in her discovery was escalating far more rapidly than she'd anticipated, creating a pressure cooker atmosphere around what should have been a private historical find. Naomi closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The renovation challenges alone had seemed overwhelming just days ago. Now she faced complex ethical and legal questions about historical artifacts, potentially worth millions of dollars, artifacts that apparently carried theological implications, significant enough to attract Vatican representatives and leading academic scholars. Her ringing phone interrupted her thoughts. The display showed Millbrook Heritage Museum, her new employer. Naomi, its director Patricia Winters, greeted her soon-to-be boss. I'm calling with wonderful news. Our grant funding was approved early, which means we can bring you on board immediately rather than next month. And I have a special request. We've just received funding for a new exhibit on local religious history. Would you be open to including St. Matthew's Chapel's restoration journey in our promotional materials? The timing seems perfect with your background in historical document preservation. The coincidence seemed almost too perfect after the morning's events. That's an interesting proposition, Patricia. What exactly would it involve? Primarily, documentation of your restoration process, perhaps some historical research about the church's significance. The county's launching a Preserving Sacred Spaces initiative next month and looking for flagship properties to feature. St. Matthew's would be ideal. Naomi hesitated, wary of additional attention, but also recognizing potential advantages. Public documentation of the church and its historical significance might actually provide a layer of protection against behind-the-scenes maneuvering by the various interested parties. I'd need to maintain certain privacy boundaries, she replied carefully, but in principle, I'm open to the idea. After ending the call, Naomi walked to the churchyard where Margaret was helping Lily plant flowers along the path to the entrance. The simple, normal activity provided a momentary respite from the mounting complications inside the church. Mom, Mrs. Thornton knows how to make the soil better with compost instead of chemicals, Lily exclaimed, hands covered in dirt. And she says we can grow herbs just like the monks used to. Margaret smiled, her earlier concern temporarily set aside. The chapel grounds were always known for their excellent growing conditions. The Thomas family maintained organic gardening practices long before they were fashionable. Naomi pulled Margaret aside while Lily continued digging. There's been another development. Princeton University has offered financial support for full restoration in exchange for academic access to the manuscripts. Margaret's expression darkened. They're moving quickly. That's concerning. There's more. I found a digital backup of all the manuscripts, created by Michael Thomas before he died. And the museum wants to feature the church in a county preservation campaign. The timing seems suspicious, Margaret agreed, but public documentation could actually work in your favor. These interested parties seem to prefer operating in the shadows, bringing community attention to the church and its historical significance. Creates witnesses and accountability. The more Naomi considered this perspective, the more strategic sense it made. If the Matthean texts were as theologically sensitive as everyone suggested, those seeking to control them would prefer discretion over public confrontation. I think I need to be proactive rather than reactive, Naomi decided. These people are going to keep coming regardless. I need allies and public awareness. Margaret nodded approvingly. The Thomas legacy has always been protected through community connections rather than isolation. Perhaps that's the approach you should continue. That evening, after securing Lily in bed, Naomi made 2 important calls. First, to Patricia Winters. Agreeing to participate in the historical preservation campaign with specific conditions that would allow her to maintain control over how the church was presented. Second, to Judith Collins at the Historical Society, inviting her to view, but not remove or extensively handle, the manuscripts behind the altar. "This is extraordinary," Judith breathed the following morning as she carefully examined the manuscripts while Naomi stood guard at the hidden chamber's entrance. These texts contain theological perspectives that differ significantly from canonical teachings. The historical significance cannot be overstated. What about their value? Naomi asked directly. Judith removed her glasses thoughtfully. Monetarily. At proper auction with authenticated provenance, likely 7 figures at minimum. But their historical and theological value transcends monetary assessment. These provide unique insights into early Christian thought before official doctrine was established. The historian hesitated, studying Naomi carefully. "You've had religious representatives approach you already, haven't you?" Naomi nodded, explaining the visits from Moretti and Elliot. "That's concerning but not surprising," Judith said. Religious texts with potential doctrinal implications often attract such attention. The question is what you intend to do with them. "I'm still determining that," Naomi admitted. "But I won't make decisions under pressure or threats. These manuscripts have remained safely preserved for generations. I intend to respect that legacy while I consider my options." Judith helped Naomi properly catalog each manuscript, providing historical context for the theological perspectives presented in the texts. The Matthean Gospel, as Michael Thomas had labeled it, contained teachings attributed to Jesus that emphasized spiritual equality, questioned established power structures, and presented a more mystical understanding of salvation than what eventually became Orthodox Church doctrine. "Notice how carefully this passage addresses the role of women," Judith pointed out. These perspectives align with some scholarly theories about the diversity of early Christian communities before institutional standardization occurred in later centuries. By mid-afternoon, they had created a comprehensive inventory of the hidden chamber's contents. As Judith prepared to leave, Naomi made a request. "I'd like to hold a small historical open house event through the county preservation program. Nothing that would endanger the manuscripts, but something that acknowledges the church's historical significance while renovation is underway." Judith looked surprised but pleased. "An excellent idea. It would establish the historical provenance publicly while maintaining your control over access. The society would be delighted to assist." After Judith departed, Naomi's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Reed? This is Dr. Gabriel Santiago from the Smithsonian's Division of Religious Textual Artifacts. I understand you've discovered early Christian manuscripts at St. Matthew's Chapel. I'd be honored to provide professional conservation assessment of these materials." Naomi remembered Judith mentioning this possibility. "Thank you for your interest, Dr. Santiago. I'm still assessing my approach to these materials, but I'll keep your offer in mind." "I should mention," Santiago continued, his tone shifting slightly, "that I've been contacted by both Vatican representatives and Professor Elliot. They've expressed some concerns about proper preservation protocols for ancient religious texts." "Did they?" Naomi replied neutrally. "How interesting that they're coordinating with federal institutions about materials they haven't personally verified." "Well, the preservation community is quite close-knit," Santiago explained somewhat defensively. "When potentially significant discoveries emerge, we naturally communicate." After ending the call, Naomi felt increasingly certain that she was facing a coordinated effort to gain control of the Matthean texts. Each interested party presented legitimate-sounding concerns about proper handling, preservation, or authentication, but the underlying message was consistent. The manuscript should be transferred from her possession to institutional control. Naomi's contemplation was interrupted by Margaret arriving with an unexpected companion, Robert Thornton, her husband, a retired professor who had apparently taught comparative religion at Millbrook University for over 30 years. "Naomi, Robert has information about those manuscripts that you need to hear," Margaret explained as they settled in the kitchen. "It connects to Michael Thomas's final arrangements." Robert Thornton, a dignified man in his 70s, spoke with the measured tone of someone accustomed to explaining complex theological matters. "The Thomas and Thornton families have maintained an understanding for generations regarding the Matthean texts. When danger threatens, the third pillar reveals the path is a phrase specifically related to contingency plans for these manuscripts." "I found the thumb drive," Naomi confirmed. "That was Michael's insurance policy," Robert explained. "But there's more to the protection system than digital backups. The Thomas family established multiple safeguards over generations." "What kind of safeguards?" Naomi asked. "The manuscripts you found are authentic ancient texts," Robert continued, "but they aren't the only copies. The Thomas family created perfect reproductions in the 1950s when interest from the Vatican intensified. If the hidden chamber were ever breached, the intruders would find historically accurate reproductions rather than the irreplaceable originals. This new information added yet another layer to the unfolding mystery. So where are the originals?" "That information was compartmentalized for safety," Robert admitted. "Margaret and I only know that a second secure location exists somewhere on the church property, accessible only through a sequence of keys and clues that Michael intended to pass to his successor. But he died without an heir," Naomi noted. "Which means you, as the property's new owner, have inadvertently inherited not just the manuscripts, but an entire protection system designed to preserve them against institutional control, a system even we don't fully understand." The implications were clear. The manuscripts in the altar chamber, while historically valuable in their own right, were sophisticated decoys designed to protect the actual originals that remained hidden somewhere else in the church. "There's something else you should know," Robert continued. "Father Moretti has a reputation among religious scholars for acquiring controversial texts through questionable methods. Several private collections have reported items disappearing after his visits. The warning was clear: the pressure from various interested parties might soon escalate beyond polite visits and persuasive offers. The manuscript security was becoming an immediate concern rather than a theoretical one. That evening, as a gentle rain began falling over Millbrook, Naomi received an email from Patricia Winters containing preliminary marketing materials for the county's historical preservation campaign. St. Matthew's Chapel featured prominently. Described as a cornerstone of local religious history with recently discovered documents of significant theological interest. The public documentation process had begun, establishing the paper trail of the church's historical significance that would make any undocumented removal of artifacts more difficult to accomplish without questions. It wasn't comprehensive security, but it created a layer of protection through visibility. As Naomi reviewed the materials, headlights swept across her churchyard. A vehicle was turning into her driveway, another uninvited visitor arriving despite the late hour and inclement weather. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw Father Moretti emerging from his sedan, this time alone. Before he reached the porch, Naomi's phone chimed with another message from the unknown number. "Do not open the door. Check the choir loft immediately." The urgency of the message sent a chill through Naomi. She peered through the peephole as Moretti knocked firmly, his expression more determined than during previous visits. "Ms. Reed, we need to speak immediately," he called through the door. "There have been developments regarding those historical materials that require immediate action." Naomi remained silent, heart pounding as she tried to decide whether to respond. The anonymous texter had proved knowledgeable about the manuscripts before. Should she trust their warning now? "Ms. Reed, I know you're home," Moretti continued, his professional tone slipping slightly. This is a matter of religious preservation and potential theological significance. Please open the door. The mention of theological significance seemed excessive for ancient manuscripts, reinforcing Naomi's growing suspicion that the interest in these texts transcended normal historical curiosity. "I can see your light through the window," Moretti added, though Naomi had been careful to stay away from visible areas. "This situation can be resolved cooperatively or through more formal channels. The choice is yours." Naomi reached for her phone, prepared to call Margaret or even the local police, when a thunderous crash echoed from upstairs, directly from the choir loft area. Someone else was in her church, and the timing with Moretti's arrival couldn't be coincidental. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, eyes wide with fear. "Mom, there's somebody walking in the choir loft." Naomi grabbed her daughter and pulled her away from the stairs, mind racing. Moretti at the front door, an intruder in the choir loft. The coordinated effort to secure the manuscripts had apparently escalated to breaking and entering. The anonymous text message now made perfect sense. The warning to check the choir loft wasn't just information. It was an immediate alert about intruders. While Moretti continued knocking with increasing insistence, Naomi gathered her frightened daughter and moved them toward the kitchen's rear exit. Whatever historical and theological secrets lay in those ancient texts, they weren't worth risking. Her family's safety. "We're going to visit the Thorntons," she whispered to the confused and frightened Lily. "Very quietly through the back door. It's an adventure, okay?" As they slipped out into the rainy night, Naomi caught glimpses of another figure moving around the side of the church, a coordinated effort to cover all exits. The historical manuscripts in the hidden chamber had apparently triggered a response, far more aggressive than she could have anticipated. Naomi and Lily crept through the wet grass toward the road, guided by the dim glow of her phone's flashlight, seeking the safety of the Thornton home and whatever guidance Robert and Margaret might provide in this moment of unexpected danger. Rain fell in heavy sheets as Naomi Reed guided her daughter through the darkness, moving away from St. Matthew's Chapel, where intruders now searched for the religious manuscripts. Lightning occasionally illuminated their path, revealing glimpses of the muddy country road they traversed toward the Thornton property, a quarter-mile away. "Mom, I'm scared," Lily whispered, her small hand clutching Naomi's tightly. "It's okay," Naomi assured her, though her own heart raced with fear and uncertainty. "We're just having an unexpected adventure. Remember how we talked about the history of this church? We're part of that history now." Lily, always perceptive beyond her years, remained silent but moved with determined focus, understanding far more of their predicament than Naomi would have wished. The Thornton home appeared in the distance, windows glowing with warm light through the rainy darkness, a beacon of safety in their moment of crisis. Robert Thornton was already waiting at the door when Naomi and Lily stumbled up the porch. Steps, drenched from the relentless downpour. He ushered them inside without a word, immediately wrapping Lily in a warm blanket while Margaret rushed from the kitchen with steaming mugs of hot chocolate. "They broke into the church," Naomi gasped, her voice trembling as water dripped from her hair onto the Thorntons' polished hardwood floor. Moretti was at the front door while someone else entered through the choir loft window. Robert's expression hardened. "So they've abandoned pretense for direct action. I feared this might happen when legitimate requests failed." He exchanged a meaningful glance with his wife. "It's time, Margaret." Margaret nodded, disappearing briefly into another room. Lily huddled closer to Naomi on the sofa, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and the resilient curiosity that defined her character. "Mr. Thornton, why do those men want our church so badly?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Robert sat across from them, his academic demeanor softening as he addressed the teenager. "It's not the church they want, Lily. It's the knowledge hidden within it. Throughout history, powerful institutions have sought to control information, that might challenge their authority or contradict their teachings. The manuscripts behind the altar, Lily concluded, surprising both adults with her perceptiveness. You know about those? Naomi asked. Lily nodded. I saw you closing the panel yesterday. I didn't say anything because you seemed worried about keeping it secret. Before Naomi could respond, Margaret returned carrying a worn leather-bound book that appeared significantly older than the church itself. This has been in our family's possession for generations, she explained, placing it on the coffee table. It documents the history of what you found, what we call the Matthean legacy. Robert opened the ancient volume carefully. The Thomas and Thornton families have been linked since the 1820s, united by a shared responsibility to protect these texts. What you discovered behind the altar is only part of a larger collection that traces back to earliest Christianity. According to family history, Margaret continued, these manuscripts were entrusted to our ancestors by a monastic order facing persecution in Europe. They contain teachings attributed to Matthew that were systematically excluded from canonized scripture because they challenged the consolidation of church power in the early centuries. Most significantly, Robert added, they emphasize spiritual equality, personal connection with the divine without institutional mediation, and perspectives on Christ's teachings that validate individual spiritual experience over hierarchical authority. The historical significance of what Naomi had stumbled upon was finally coming into focus. So these texts aren't just historical curiosities. They represent an alternative understanding of Christianity that powerful religious institutions have actively suppressed for centuries. Precisely, Robert confirmed. Which is why Father Moretti and his associates are willing to break into your property to acquire them. The Vatican's official position would be that they're protecting the faithful from potentially misleading apocryphal texts. The reality is more complex. Lily, who had been listening intently, asked the question that had been forming in Naomi's mind. But if these manuscripts are so important, why were they hidden in a small church in Millbrook rather than a big museum or university? Margaret smiled approvingly at the teenager's insight. Because institutions can be compromised, Lily. Powerful interests can exert pressure on museums and universities. But a modest church in a small town, protected by ordinary people committed to preserving historical truth, that's proven remarkably effective for over a century. A sudden pounding on the Thorntons' front door interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Naomi glimpsed Father Moretti's black sedan parked at the curb. They followed us, she whispered, instinctively pulling Lily closer. Robert rose calmly. I expected as much. They won't find it easy to intimidate us on our own property. He motioned for the others to remain seated as he approached the door. Naomi heard muffled voices, Robert's measured tones contrasting with Moretti's increasingly insistent demands. After several tense minutes, the front door closed and Robert returned to the living room. They're claiming to have proof the manuscripts were stolen from Vatican archives in the 1800s, he reported, his academic demeanor now firmly in place. I informed them that such allegations would require proper legal documentation and suggested they pursue their claims through appropriate channels during normal business hours. They won't give up so easily, Margaret noted. No, Robert agreed, which is why we need to implement the contingency plan Michael Thomas established before his death. Outside, the headlights of Moretti's sedan remained visible through the rain-streaked windows, a silent reminder of the pressure building around Naomi's unlikely discovery. What contingency plan? Naomi asked. Robert turned to her with unexpected intensity. Michael Thomas knew his health was failing and that he was the last of his family line. He approached us 3 years ago to establish procedures for protecting the manuscripts if the church ever changed hands. That thumb drive you found was only the first layer of protection. Margaret took up the explanation. The manuscripts behind the altar are authentic ancient texts, but they're not the complete collection. The most significant documents, what Michael called the core testimony, are secured elsewhere. Where? Naomi asked. We don't know precisely, Robert admitted. Michael compartmentalized the information deliberately. He created a sequence of clues and keys that would lead the church's new owner to the complete collection, but only if they proved worthy of the responsibility. The weight of this unexpected legacy settled on Naomi's shoulders. When she'd spent her last $200 on a foreclosed church, she'd hoped merely to provide shelter for her daughter. Now she found herself entangled in a centuries-old effort to preserve religious texts that powerful institutions would prefer to control or suppress. I never asked for this responsibility, Naomi said quietly. I just wanted a home. Few people ask for the responsibility history places upon them, Margaret replied gently. But consider this. Of all the potential buyers who might have purchased St. Matthew's Chapel, it was acquired by a trained librarian with expertise in document preservation, someone whose entire professional life prepared her to understand the value of these manuscripts. Perhaps it wasn't mere coincidence, Robert suggested. Michael Thomas was a man of deep faith. He believed the right guardian would find their way to the church when the time was right. Lily, who had been listening intently, suddenly sat up straighter. Mom, remember what you always told me about your work at the university? That preserving historical documents wasn't just about the past, but about protecting the truth for future generations? Naomi felt a surge of emotion at her daughter's words. Throughout her career, she had indeed spoken passionately about the importance of historical preservation as a sacred trust, a responsibility to ensure that future generations had access to unfiltered historical truths, especially those that powerful interests might prefer to suppress. The rain stopped, Robert observed, glancing toward the window. But Moretti and his associate remain outside, watching the house. We need to act before they attempt more aggressive measures. What do you suggest? Naomi asked. Implementation of Michael's contingency plan, Robert replied, rising from his chair with surprising energy for a man his age. The first step is securing what you've already found. We need to document everything properly before Moretti and his associates can remove anything from the church. Margaret disappeared briefly into another room, returning with a high-quality digital camera and portable scanner. These are specifically designed for archival documentation. We can create verifiable records of everything in the hidden chamber. But how do we get back into the church with Moretti's people watching? Naomi asked. Robert smiled for the first time that evening. St. Matthew's Chapel has stood for over a century. Do you think the Thomas family wouldn't have established multiple access points for precisely this type of situation? Within minutes, Robert had sketched a rough map of the church grounds, indicating a maintenance tunnel that connected the chapel's basement to a small gardening shed approximately 50 yards from the main building. Michael showed me this passage. Years ago, he explained. It was originally constructed to maintain access during severe winter storms, but it also serves as a discreet entry point when necessary. As they prepared to leave, Robert retrieved a small wooden box from his study. Michael entrusted this to me shortly before his death. He said it contained the first key to finding the core testimony, but that it should only be given to the chapel's new owner if they demonstrated genuine commitment to preserving the manuscripts. Naomi accepted the box with a sense of reverence that surprised her. Whatever reservations she might have had about this unexpected responsibility were giving way to a growing determination. The institutional pressure to surrender the manuscripts had transformed what might have been a simple historical curiosity into something she now felt personally committed to protecting. We should move quickly, Margaret urged, checking her watch. Our neighbor Samuel is creating a diversion to draw Moretti away from the house. We'll have a brief window to reach the gardening shed unobserved. The plan worked with surprising efficiency. As they slipped out the Thorntons' back door, Naomi glimpsed an elderly man enthusiastically waving down Moretti's sedan near the end of the driveway, apparently reporting a suspicious vehicle near the church. The gardening shed appeared ordinary enough, weathered wood, garden tools hanging from rusty nails, the earthy smell of soil and fertilizer. But when Robert pushed aside a seemingly immovable workbench, he revealed a trapdoor concealed beneath. Layers of protective dirt and straw. The Thomas family were meticulous in their precautions, he explained, lifting the heavy wooden door to reveal stone steps descending into darkness. This tunnel dates back to the 1920s, when there was concern about religious persecution reaching even rural America. Armed with flashlights, the small group descended into the cool, damp passage. Lily's earlier fear had transformed into determined curiosity, her eyes wide as she traced the rough-hewn walls with her fingertips. People built this just to protect. Some old books, she whispered. Not just books, Robert corrected gently. Ideas, perspectives on faith that offered spiritual freedom rather than institutional control. Throughout history, more blood has been shed over competing religious interpretations than perhaps any other cause. The tunnel stretched approximately 30 yards, eventually ending at another trapdoor. Robert ascended first, confirming the basement was clear before helping the others up. The church basement was predominantly used for storage. Old pews, holiday decorations, and maintenance supplies crowded the limited space. The chamber behind the altar should be our first priority, Naomi suggested. We need to document everything before Moretti finds a way to gain access. As they carefully ascended the narrow stairs to the main sanctuary, Naomi felt a mounting sense of purpose. What had begun as a desperate gamble on affordable housing had evolved into something far more significant, a role in preserving historical truths that powerful institutions had sought to control for centuries. The sanctuary appeared undisturbed. Moonlight now filtering through the stained glass windows and casting colored patterns across the stone floor. The group moved silently toward the altar, hyper-aware of any sounds that might indicate Moretti had returned. Naomi activated the hidden mechanism, and the wooden panel swung inward to reveal the secret chamber. Working with practiced efficiency, Margaret began photographing each manuscript page while Robert made detailed notes about their condition and content. Naomi carefully examined the metal container she'd noticed during her initial discovery. The box was sealed with a small lock that matched the key in the wooden box Robert had given her. When she opened it, she found a collection of smaller items, a handwritten letter in Michael Thomas's distinctive script, several ancient coins, and a small leather-bound book that appeared to be a personal journal rather than a historical manuscript. The letter addressed her directly, to the new guardian of St. Matthew's Chapel. If you're reading this, I have passed from this world, and you have discovered the legacy entrusted to my family for generations. The manuscripts you found represent only part of a larger testimony that challenges how Christianity developed after Christ's death. The complete collection, what we call the core testimony, remains secured elsewhere within the church grounds. To find it, you must prove worthy of the responsibility by demonstrating both knowledge and commitment to preserving historical truth regardless of institutional pressure. The journal enclosed contains the first clues to locating the complete collection. Each discovery will lead to the next, ultimately revealing the location of manuscripts that have remained hidden for nearly 2 centuries. Choose carefully whom you trust with this knowledge. Throughout history, institutions have sought to control these texts rather than allow their message of spiritual freedom to reach the wider world. With faith in Providence, Michael Thomas. As Naomi read the letter aloud, she felt the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on her shoulders. The journal appeared to contain a series of biblical references and cryptic notes that would require careful study to decipher. He created an actual treasure hunt, Lily whispered, peering over her mother's shoulder with newfound excitement. A security system, Robert corrected. Michael knew that interested parties might eventually gain access to this chamber. By separating the collection and creating this sequential discovery process, he ensured that only someone with genuine commitment would find everything. Their documentation work continued for nearly an hour, creating comprehensive records of every item in the hidden chamber. As they finished, Margaret's phone chimed with a text message. "Samuel says Moretti and another man have returned to the church," she reported tensely. "They're attempting to gain entry through the main doors." The sound of splintering wood confirmed her warning. The front doors of the chapel were being forced open. "We need to leave immediately," Robert urged. "We can't be caught here." "But the manuscripts," Naomi protested. "We can't let them take them." "Remember what I told you," Robert replied. "The manuscripts here are not the complete collection. They're historically valuable but not irreplaceable. The truly significant texts remain hidden elsewhere." Conflicted, Naomi made a split-second decision. She quickly photographed the remaining pages of Michael's journal, then gathered her daughter and followed the Thorntons toward the basement tunnel entrance. They were halfway across the sanctuary when the main doors burst open. Father Moretti and two men Naomi hadn't seen before entered, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. "Miss Reed," Moretti called, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "This intrusion is regrettable but necessary. The materials you've discovered have significant theological implications that require proper ecclesiastical evaluation." Robert stepped forward, positioning himself between Moretti and the others. "You're trespassing on private property, Father. I suggest you leave before we contact law enforcement." One of Moretti's companions moved toward the altar with practiced efficiency, clearly familiar with the hidden mechanism. Within moments, the panel swung open, revealing the secret chamber. "As we suspected," the man announced. "Ancient manuscripts, apparently Greek texts of religious nature." Moretti turned to Naomi, his expression a mixture of triumph and professional courtesy. "Ms. Reed, these artifacts clearly belong in proper archival facilities with appropriate preservation protocols. The Vatican Historical Archives can ensure their protection and scholarly evaluation. Those manuscripts were legally conveyed with this property," Naomi replied, finding courage in her growing commitment to the Thomas family's legacy. "Any removal without court orders constitutes theft." The standoff was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of police sirens approaching the church. Moretti's companions exchanged alarmed glances. "Margaret contacted the sheriff before we left the house," Robert explained calmly. "Breaking and entering remains a crime, regardless of one's ecclesiastical standing." Moretti's professional demeanor faltered for the first time. "This situation is more complex than you realize. These texts have significant implications for theological understanding. They cannot simply be treated as private property." "The courts can determine their proper disposition," Naomi countered. "Until then, they remain legally mine as part of this property." The approaching sirens apparently convinced Moretti that immediate retreat was advisable. With visible reluctance, he nodded to his companions, who backed away from the altar. "This matter is far from resolved," he warned as they moved toward the door. "Artifacts of this significance transcend ordinary property considerations." As Moretti and his associates hastily departed, Naomi felt a surge of conflicting emotions: relief at the immediate crisis's resolution, anxiety about the escalating situation, and a growing sense of purpose unlike anything she'd experienced since losing her career at the university. Sheriff Eleanor Williams arrived minutes later, her deputy securing the broken front doors while she took statements from Naomi and the Thorntons. A respected figure in Millbrook, the sheriff's no-nonsense approach provided a welcome counterpoint to the evening's dramatic events. "Breaking and entering, potential attempted theft of historical artifacts," she summarized, reviewing her notes. "I'll file charges against these individuals. Once we confirmed their identities through the license plate information Mr. Thornton provided. They claimed to represent the Vatican, Naomi explained. Sheriff Williams raised an eyebrow. Religious affiliation doesn't exempt anyone from property laws. Ms. Reed, I suggest securing any valuable items until this situation is resolved legally. After the sheriff departed, promising increased patrols near the church, Naomi faced a difficult decision. The manuscripts in the hidden chamber were now known to Moretti and his associates. Legal processes might eventually protect them, but institutional pressure could prove formidable. We should focus on finding the complete collection, Robert suggested. Michael's journal appears to contain the first clues. But we need a safe place to work, Margaret added. The church is clearly being watched. Naomi thought for a moment, then smiled. Actually, I have the perfect solution. I start my new job at the Millbrook Heritage Museum tomorrow. As their historical document preservation specialist, I'll have access to secure research facilities and professional resources. Hiding in plain sight, Robert nodded approvingly. Using legitimate institutional resources to protect the very manuscripts certain institutions hope to control. As they prepared to leave through the tunnel, ensuring the secret chamber was properly resealed, Lily approached the altar with unexpected solemnity. "Mom, look at this," she called softly, pointing to an inscription carved into the stone base, barely visible beneath years of accumulated candle wax. Carefully scraping away the wax revealed Latin text, Veritas vos liberabit. "The truth shall set you free," Naomi translated. Her years of academic training serving a purpose she could never have anticipated when she purchased this abandoned church. The phrase seemed to crystallize the significance of what they were. Protecting not just ancient documents, but the principle that historical truth deserved preservation even when it challenged established narratives. That night, Naomi and Lily stayed with the Thorntons, their church no longer secure enough for overnight residence. As Lily slept peacefully in the guest bedroom, Naomi began the painstaking process of analyzing Michael Thomas's journal, searching for clues to the hidden core testimony. The journal's entries span decades, documenting Michael's stewardship of the manuscripts and his growing concern as his health failed with no family heir to continue the tradition. Several passages reference the sevenfold key, apparently, a sequential process for locating the complete collection. One entry particularly caught Naomi's attention. The first key lies in understanding why Matthew alone among the evangelists emphasized the spiritual equality that later church fathers found so troubling. The window that bears his image reveals more than mere colored glass to those who seek with genuine purpose. "The stained glass window," Naomi murmured. St. Matthew's Chapel featured a magnificent stained glass window depicting the apostle Matthew writing his gospel, located above the choir loft. Robert, who had been reviewing his own notes nearby, looked up with interest. Michael was particularly protective of that window. He personally oversaw its restoration in the 1990s, insisting on using a craftsman from Philadelphia rather than local artisans. The next morning brought unexpected developments that further complicated Naomi's situation. Her phone chimed with an email from Patricia Winters at the Millbrook Heritage Museum. Dr. Chun smiled at Lily's forthrightness. "Exactly. The manuscripts behind the altar are valuable, but they're not the complete testimony. Michael created an intricate security system to protect the most significant texts, a system that requires both knowledge and ethical commitment to navigate." As they entered the museum, Patricia Winters greeted Naomi warmly, casting a curious glance at Dr. Chun. "This is a specialist consultant helping with the St. Matthew's preservation documentation," Naomi explained smoothly. "Part of my background. Research before the restoration project officially begins." Patricia nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "Your office is ready, second floor, east wing. The preservation lab is fully equipped, though I'm still waiting for the final grant paperwork to process your official employment documents. The preservation lab proved ideal for their purposes. Climate-controlled, equipped with specialized documentation technology, and importantly, secured with keycard access and surveillance cameras that would make any unauthorized intrusion immediately evident. The visible security actually helps us, Dr. Chun noted once they were alone in the lab. No one can simply break in and take materials as they attempted at the church. Naomi carefully unpacked Michael's journal and spread out the photographs of the manuscripts from the hidden chamber. The journal mentions a 7-fold key and references the stained glass window depicting St. Matthew. Dr. Chun nodded, her expression brightening with recognition. The 7-sealed book from Revelation, it's a biblical metaphor, Michael, often used when discussing the protection system. He believed truth was revealed progressively to those who demonstrated worthiness through ethical commitment. As they examined the photographs together, Dr. Chun provided insights into the theological significance of the manuscripts that helped clarify why institutions might be so interested in controlling them. These texts present early Christian teachings that emphasize direct spiritual connection without institutional mediation, she explained. They suggest that Christ's original message was significantly more focused on personal spiritual development and equality than on creating hierarchical church structures, which would challenge the foundational authority claims of traditional religious institutions. Naomi concluded, her academic background helping her grasp the implications. Precisely, Dr. Chun confirmed. It's not just historical interest driving Father Moretti's actions. These manuscripts potentially undermine the very basis for institutional religious authority as it developed over centuries. Lily, who had been quietly organizing the photographs into sequential order based on apparent page numbering, suddenly called their attention to a recurring symbol in the manuscript. Margins, a stylized key alongside what appeared to be architectural notations. "Look at these," she pointed out. "They're in different places on different pages, but they all look similar, like they might be showing parts of the church building." Dr. Chun examined the markings with growing excitement. "Michael once told me the complete collection was hidden within the architecture itself. I assumed he was speaking metaphorically, but perhaps not. Architectural plans hidden within the manuscript margins," Naomi mused. "Brilliant security through obscurity. Even if someone obtained the manuscripts, they'd need to recognize these markings as significant and assemble them correctly to locate the hidden collection." The three worked through the morning, carefully documenting each manuscript page while simultaneously searching for patterns in the marginal notations. By noon, they had identified 7 distinct architectural elements that, when properly aligned, appeared to create a partial floor plan of St. Matthew's Chapel, with a specific location marked near the bell tower. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Chun breathed. "A security system embedded within the historical documents themselves. Anyone seeking to control these manuscripts would need to understand their content deeply enough to recognize these patterns." Their progress was interrupted by Naomi's phone ringing, an unknown number that she answered cautiously. "Ms. Reed? This is Andrew Lawson, cultural heritage attorney referred by the Thorntons. I've just been served with papers indicating the diocese is filing for an emergency injunction to prevent removal or alteration of any historical religious artifacts at St. Matthew's Chapel, pending evaluation by church authorities." The legal pressure was mounting, just as their anonymous contact, now revealed as Dr. Chen, had predicted. "What does this mean practically?" Naomi asked. As Dr. Chun had carefully examined these original texts, her academic composure had given way to visible emotion. "These appear to be primary source documents from the earliest Christian communities," she had whispered. "If authentic, they're among the most significant religious historical discoveries of the century." The text presented teachings attributed to Christ that emphasize spiritual equality, personal connection with the divine without institutional mediation, and community values that differed significantly from doctrines that later became orthodox. Christianity. While Father Moretti and the diocese had continued their legal efforts to gain control of the manuscripts, the situation had shifted dramatically when Naomi made a bold decision. Rather than fighting institutional pressure through protracted legal battles, she had chosen to protect the manuscripts through public transparency. Working with Dr. Chun, the Thorntons, and a carefully selected team of religious scholars from diverse backgrounds, Naomi had established the Matthean Heritage Trust, a non-profit organization dedicated to preserving the manuscripts while making them accessible to legitimate researchers regardless of religious affiliation. The Trust's founding documents explicitly prevented any single religious institution from gaining control of the collection. Instead, oversight was shared among representatives from multiple faith traditions, academic institutions, and the local community, with Naomi serving as the Trust's inaugural director. 2 minutes until we're rolling, called the documentary producer, interrupting Naomi's reflections. The PBS Frontline special, The Lost Gospel, Rediscovering Early Christianity, would introduce the Matthean text to a national audience, further cementing their place in public consciousness. Margaret Thornton joined Naomi near the display cases, her expression warm with approval. Michael Thomas would be so proud of what you've accomplished here. He protected these texts for decades, but you've done something he never managed, created a sustainable path for their preservation. Beyond any single guardian. I couldn't have done it without the community that formed around this place, Naomi replied, gesturing toward the diverse group now filling the chapel. Academic researchers, local supporters, and visitors from across the country moved through the space, examining displays and discussing the historical significance of the collection. The Matthean Heritage Center had become an unexpected catalyst for Millbrook's revitalization. Tourism had increased substantially, with scholars and religious history enthusiasts visiting from around the world. The museum gift shop, formerly the pastor's office, now generated enough revenue to support the center's operating costs, while grant funding covered ongoing research and preservation efforts. Most importantly for Naomi, the desperate financial circumstances that had driven her to purchase the foreclosed church had been completely reversed. As the Heritage Center's director, she now earned a stable salary doing work that perfectly aligned with her professional training and personal values. The church's former choir loft had been converted into a comfortable apartment where she and Lily lived rent-free as part of her compensation package. Places everyone, called the documentary. Director, we'll begin with Dr. Reed explaining how she discovered the manuscripts. Naomi still found it strange to be addressed as doctor. The honorary doctorate from Millbrook University had been unexpected recognition of her contribution to religious historical preservation. For someone who had once faced imminent homelessness, the transformation of her circumstances sometimes seemed almost miraculous. As the cameras began rolling, Naomi recounted the story of her desperate purchase and subsequent discovery with a calm professionalism that belied the emotional turmoil she had experienced during those early days. The Matthean texts represent a unique window into early Christian thought, she explained for the documentary. They remind us that religious traditions often develop through complex processes of inclusion and exclusion, with certain perspectives becoming dominant while others are marginalized or forgotten entirely. What she didn't mention on camera, what only her closest confidants knew, was how the manuscripts had affected her personally. Raised with only casual religious exposure, Naomi had never considered herself particularly spiritual. Yet the teachings preserved in these ancient texts, with their emphasis on direct spiritual connection and equality, had resonated with her in unexpected ways. The documentary filming continued throughout the day, capturing not just the manuscripts and restoration work, but also the community that had formed around the Matthean Heritage Center. Local residents served as volunteer guides, trained to explain The historical significance of the collection without imposing religious interpretation. University students worked as interns, gaining valuable experience in historical preservation while contributing to ongoing research projects. By late afternoon, as the film crew packed their equipment, Naomi found a quiet moment alone in the sanctuary. Sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows created pools of colored light across the polished floor, a visual metaphor for how illumination came in diverse forms, each contributing to a complete picture. "Penny for your thoughts," came a familiar voice. Robert Thornton approached, his academic demeanor softened by genuine affection. "I was just reflecting on how completely my life has changed since I bought this place," Naomi admitted. 6 months ago, I was facing homelessness with just over $200 to my name. Now, the greatest protection for truth is not secrecy, but transparent stewardship. What powerful interests would suppress in darkness cannot so easily be controlled when brought into light and shared with those who recognize its value. That philosophy had guided Naomi's approach to preserving the Matthean texts. Rather than hiding them or surrendering them to any single institution's control, she had chosen public preservation through community stewardship, creating a model that balanced accessibility with protection. The financial security this work provided had transformed her life completely. From the brink of homelessness, she now directed an internationally recognized heritage institution, her expertise valued and her contribution acknowledged. The desperate gamble of spending her last $200 on a foreclosed church had yielded returns beyond anything she could have imagined. Yet the material benefits paled in comparison to the sense of purpose she had discovered. After months of unemployment and rejection, Naomi had found work that perfectly aligned with her values and utilized her professional skills to their fullest extent. The manuscripts weren't just historically valuable artifacts. They represented an opportunity to ensure that marginalized perspectives from history remained accessible to future generations. Lily entered the sanctuary, her footsteps echoing slightly in the empty space. "Ready to head upstairs? I made pasta for dinner." Naomi smiled at this evidence of her daughter's growing independence. At 16, Lily had developed into a remarkably self-sufficient young woman. Her experiences over the past 6 months accelerating her maturity in positive ways. From initial fear about their precarious financial situation, she had embraced their new life with characteristic adaptability, finding her own role within the Heritage Center's community. Their apartment in the converted choir loft offered a perfect balance of privacy and connection to their work. Large windows overlooked both the sanctuary and the town beyond, while thoughtful renovation had created comfortable living space that respected the building's historical character. As they climbed the stairs to their home, Naomi reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a desperate last resort purchase had evolved into something that transformed not just their personal circumstances, but an entire community's understanding of religious history. The foreclosed church purchased for $200 had provided not just physical shelter, but a sense of purpose and belonging that transcended material security. The manuscripts hidden behind its altar had connected Naomi to a generations-long tradition of preserving historical perspectives that powerful institutions might otherwise have controlled or suppressed. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Lily asked as they reached their apartment door. "What's that?" "How weird it is that the worst moment of our lives, when we were about to be homeless and you spent your last money on this old church, turned out to be the best decision you ever made." Naomi smiled at her daughter's insight. Sometimes what looks like desperate last resorts turn out to be new beginnings. We just can't see it at the time. That evening, as autumn twilight settled over Millbrook, lights glowed warmly in the windows of St. Matthew's Chapel, no longer an abandoned building but a vibrant center of community, scholarship, and purpose. The humble woman who had purchased a foreclosed church with her last $200 had discovered not just hidden manuscripts, but her own capacity to create meaningful change in the world. The transformation extended beyond the physical restoration of a dilapidated building or the preservation of historically significant texts. It represented the profound truth that sometimes life's most desperate moments can unexpectedly open doors to purpose and fulfillment beyond anything we might have imagined. Naomi Reed stood at her apartment window, gazing down at the illuminated sanctuary below. 6 months earlier, she had been a desperate single mother facing homelessness, spending her last $200 on a condemned building in a last-ditch effort to provide shelter for her daughter. Now she directed an internationally recognized heritage center, her expertise valued and her contribution acknowledged. The manuscripts hidden behind the altar had indeed proven valuable beyond measure, not just in monetary terms, but in their contribution to historical understanding and their capacity to bring together a community, united in preserving knowledge rather than controlling it. What had begun as Naomi's personal crisis had evolved into a collective triumph of preservation, scholarship, and community revitalization. The foreclosed church with its hidden room behind the altar had transformed not just her family's future, but an entire town's understanding of its place in religious history. As lights twinkled on throughout Millbrook, Naomi reflected on how completely her life had changed since that desperate day she'd placed a bid on St. Matthew's Chapel. The path had not been easy. Institutional pressure, legal challenges, and technical preservation difficulties had created significant obstacles along the way. Yet through it all, an unexpected community had formed around her, providing support, expertise, and friendship when she needed it most. What began as a solitary act of desperation had evolved into a collaborative achievement that benefited countless people beyond her immediate family. The Matthean Heritage Center now stood as testament to what could be accomplished when historical preservation prioritized accessibility over institutional control, when ancient texts were treated not as weapons in theological debates, but as windows into diverse perspectives from humanity's spiritual journey. "Mom, dinner's ready," Lily called from their small kitchen, the domestic normalcy a reassuring contrast to the global significance of their work. As Naomi joined her daughter for their evening meal, she felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. The foreclosed church purchased with her last $200 had given them far more than physical shelter. It had provided purpose, community, and the opportunity to contribute something meaningful to the world. Sometimes, she reflected, what appears to be the end of all options becomes instead the beginning of possibilities we never imagined possible. The hidden room behind the altar had contained not just ancient manuscripts, but the keys to a future brighter than anything Naomi Reed could have dreamed when, in her moment of greatest desperation, she took a chance on a forgotten church that no one else wanted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.